6 cancer researchers in the same lab were diagnosed with rare forms of cancer. People are now questioning what caused it, and the hospital has dismantled the laboratory, covering up the tracks. And this is sounding like Wuhan's gain-of-function research gone wrong. What is China up to now? Welcome to China Insider, I'm David Zhang. On November 8th, a cancer research lab at the Sun Yat-sen Memorial Hospital of Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou, China, well, that was a mouthful, was dismantled after 6 members of their cancer research lab were diagnosed with cancerous tumors. Now, this information was leaked first from private chats on November 7th and has gained massive public attention. So I think you deserve to know this because the scenario is screaming a repeat of 2020 in Wuhan with the COVID, and this is like the Zhang of cancer research in China. Officially, they first denied the news, but later admitted that only 3 researchers have been diagnosed. And before a third-party investigation could even take place over this incident, the hospital department quickly took down the research lab and tried to cover up the evidence. And I guess they learned from Wuhan. If the specimen has been discarded and intentionally destroyed, then with the current legal system and technical capabilities, it's extremely difficult to determine whether the lab and team leader is responsible. Now, according to private messages, there are actually 6 people who have cancer now, not 3. And strangely though, that 3 of them officially admitted by the hospital were all diagnosed in the same year, this year. And they all have a rare form of cancer. Plus, they're all in their late 20s and early 30s. And that alone is very questionable to begin with having rare forms of cancer younger of age as well as working in the same lab. These are really strange. So how exactly does a lab researching cancer end up having their own researchers diagnosed with cancer? Well, we have to consider, of course, there's the natural probability. Even some data suggests that researchers have a higher chance getting cancer compared to regular people since they're exposed to carcinogens. But for a whole team, that's fishy. So spreading online are chat messages saying that one of the 6 cancer patients now is a girl named Huang Min. She's a researcher, of course. She was diagnosed this year after experiencing belly pain. She went in for a pancreatitis screening, and after biopsy, they found that it's actually a rare form of pancreatic cancer, a type of undifferentiated pancreatic cancer. And it has actually spread to the liver. So, of course, we know that once a cancer spreads to a different organ or metastasizes, it's an indication that it has reached the late stage of the cancer. And she's 29. Now, the other researchers have all believed to be diagnosed with different forms of breast cancers, again, rare forms. So now the question becomes, what could have they possibly been exposed to have all been diagnosed with cancer? Well, this research lab specializes in breast cancer research, and they work with reagents, which are chemicals that are highly toxic to human beings. And of course, they're carcinogenic, which means that they can cause cancer. Now, the goal is to induce cancer into lab tests to study the different effects with different reagents or chemicals on cancer, or to cause cancer, right? But the point of cancer research here is that on paper, it's for the good cause. But who knows what they're doing in China? Something really went wrong here if you think about it. Now, in the discussion about the collective cancer among students at Sun Yat-sen Second Hospital, some of the internet users believe that the reagents is the key here. They were used to create tumor models to study on for lab rats or different animals in the laboratory, and it accidentally entered the human body somehow, which caused the students to develop tumors. And if this is the cancerous cell evading our immune surveillance and for some reason proliferate to a certain extent, and then of course we can see the growth of a tumor. Now, exposure usually would consider things like physiochemical factors, such as radiation and chemical exposure. But in the case of a controlled setting like a lab, it really calls into the technical protection and safety aspects, right? Now, if it was really a rare type of cancer or so-called undifferentiated type, as that woman has, it probably has something to do with contamination of reagents, which targets regulatory targets such as plasmids, siRNAs, you have engineered bacteria, viruses, etc. Or simply they're activating cancer growth pathways in human bodies. Now, the cause and pursuits of such tumors in research is simply beyond the ability of in-hospital clinical guidelines and pathology department microscopy to simply identify them. And so what I'm trying to say is that this is beyond the scope of the lab team itself. It's become a wider problem. Now, the intention is, of course, falling onto the director, or in this case, the deputy director of this hospital's breast cancer research department. His name is Su Shicheng, and he's also cited among multiple other researchers, authors, including the woman who has been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Su, in fact, kicked her out of their department group chat without telling her why, and that's after the news came out about the diagnosis. And so that's basically telling her that she's been left and discarded to die from cancer. It seems like the hospital is also siding clearly to protect with Su Shicheng, the vice director, who over the victims who are dying. And Su, of course, is very connected in the medical world. He is the niece of one of China's top breast cancer researcher, as well as he has extensively been allowed to research different areas which are seemed controversial to the medical research into breast cancer. And he has denied the members of his department that saying that they were exposed to things like reagents or carcinogens. But he must know exactly what was being researched in those labs before this incident happened, what chemicals or carcinogens or potential toxins that were exposed to the researchers. And in general, in China, we know that there's a lack of safety standards when it comes to the biosafety labs, but also when it comes to the reagent manufacturing, it's equally bad. Now, according to information given to a China source, teacher Li, and this is a former research student at Beijing University, he says that any domestic reagents should be treated as highly toxic and carcinogenic because reagents made in China suffer from a lack of regulation. Some of the exposure, aka toxic side effects, only get reflected many, many years later, until, of course, it's too late. Now, unscrupulous manufacturers of highly toxic carcinogenic reagents, they tend to change the name of the chemicals on the packaging as well as so-called environmental details to make them environmentally friendly, non-carcinogenic reagents. Now, for example, the nucleic acid dye known as Goldview is advertised as a new environmentally friendly dye, but it doesn't mention anything with its toxic properties. Many mass spectrometry analysis, nuclear magnetic resonance, actually found that this is a strong carcinogenic acridine, orange, that's the full name. And so they are lying to the students who are doing the research, and they're not telling them about the potential toxic side effects. And that's, again, happening in China. Now, then the students will go on to discuss that there's a lack of protection in basic procedures in labs in China at the universities, and it becomes a lackluster process because schools simply don't care enough for chemical exposures when it comes to dealing with these really toxic chemicals. Now, Su Shicheng, the vice director, has done also many controversial researches, like I said. One of them, he had a prior research paper where he talks about the suppression of anti-tumor gene INI1 in human cells. So INI1 would actually help to stop tumor growth in human body. And he researched it using the virus known as the Epstein-Barr virus, and that is used to induce cancer in the nasal area. So that process inhibits the expression of INI1 cells, which of course are found commonly in many cells in the body. So it stops tumor growth, but if you inhibit it, then the INI1 gene will be detected as negative. And so once that research was done in the lab, then of course we know that there's corresponding reagents that are used to do the suppression, right? Whether that's a virus or different sorts of chemical. But the goal here is to suppress the gene. And so if the immunohistoric chemistry of these students shows abnormality of the gene, then it's a contamination issue of the knockdown reagents that can be one of the suspects, right? And so it turns out, according to the diagnosis of this woman who has pancreatic cancer, she tested negative for the INI1 gene expression. So that kind of coincides. Now, while this cannot fully explain that maybe the exposure is on this or pinpoint to what the reason is for her cancer, we can see that there are prior research being done in this particular lab led by this guy who has explored this area. So how exactly were the students exposed to the reagents or otherwise carcinogenic properties? No one actually knows. Would they inject themselves voluntarily with crazy chemicals like in the movies? Unlikely. Maybe by accident, but the probability is so small. These are trained scientists. So there must be some sort of a way or procedural mistake that was made that led to this. And it's not just one researcher. Remember, this is 6 people we're talking about, a whole team of scientists that now have rare forms of cancer. Now, first of all, this is sounding a lot like exactly what happened with Wuhan 2020, right? You have cover-ups, you have crazy science experiments gone wrong, and it ends in a pandemic. But in this case, we're dealing with cancer here. This is much worse. And it also shows us that under the guise of cancer research, China's not up to safety standards, they're not up to, they're secretive about what they're doing. And this is all under the guise of performing medical access research so that we can better understand cancer, right? It's like the gain of function of cancer research in China. They quickly scrubbed and took down the lab, even if the sequencing identifies that same highly suspicious target. It's undoubtful whether it can actually be used in court as evidence for accountability. And cancer research is very important in China for another reason, simply because they have many cases of cancer. And lung cancer, I believe, is the #1. And so based on that, cancer research, and this is the second part, right? It's a key part of this medical access to better understand how cancer is caused or happens. But in reality, specifically in China that I'm talking about, it's a dual use, gain of function type of situation. Now, the Chinese military or PLA can easily weaponize these cancer-inducing research to produce powerful weapons against China's enemies. And that's the scary part. So just like gain-of-function research, they're not up to the safety standards to contain these research, while they're also trying to find the antidote to a poison, which is the virus in the case of the biolabs. Here, they're playing with pure fire. And unfortunately, I just don't think we're being told the full story by authorities in China yet. So we'll stay tuned and see if there's more development for this case. All right, that's it today for the episode on China's cancer researchers have all caught some rare form of cancer after working in the same lab. And we're talking about why that was the case. All right, if you enjoyed the content, leave a like, comment below your thoughts on this particular story. And what do you think is the reason? And let me know in the comments again, because this is quite scary, right? And also subscribe to our channel. All right, this is China Insider. I'm David Zhang. We'll see you next time.